I've read accounts of animal encounters that stay with you long after you've put the book down. But one in particular haunts me. It's a story of a farm advisor in Indonesia, a man with experience and knowledge who met a terrifying end. It reminds me that even those who respect and understand the natural world can become victims in an instant. It was July 21st, 2016, near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning air was thick with humidity after the previous night's rain. But by evening, something truly terrible would happen. Something that would send shockwaves through the small community. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old from Britain, worked there as a farm advisor. His job was to improve the water systems for growing palm trees. He was known as a quiet, diligent man, often seen walking the farm alone, jotting down observations in his notebook. Reggie had been in Indonesia for 4 months, meticulously documenting the local flora and fauna. He'd taken countless photos of insects, birds and animals, always eager to learn about the creatures around him. The workers noticed he never shooed away snakes or lizards, instead kneeling to observe them closely. On that day, Reggie set out for his routine work, checking the water ditches ahead of the rainy season. Blocked ditches meant flooded crops, so it was crucial work. He packed his notebook, measuring tape, and phone. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, spotted Reggie near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They joked with him about the large snakes rumoured to inhabit the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he'd love to see one of these big snakes up close. According to the workers, he didn't seem concerned by their warnings. He dismissed their fears as old wives' tales. The palm farm stretched for miles, a grid of palm trees divided by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy from the recent rain, making some areas treacherous. Dragonflies flitted over the water, while mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant drone of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs from the ditches. The heat hung heavy, creating a sense of stillness. This area is home to reticulated pythons, some of the largest snakes in the world. They can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 200 pounds. They are ambush predators, lying in wait near water for animals like pigs or dogs. Sometimes they even attack humans. Although such attacks are rare in this part of Indonesia, the snakes have been moving closer to human activity, as their natural habitats are destroyed. Locals knew to be wary of these snakes, and some carried long knives for protection when working near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned to camp. Amir grew concerned and walked towards the area where he had last seen him. The farm was eerily silent, save for the constant hum of insects. Then Amir saw something that froze him in his tracks. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was grotesquely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir stood motionless for a moment, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men stood staring at the snake as it slowly moved toward the bushes. The swollen midsection dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, attempting to poke at the snake from a safe distance. The python hissed loudly and opened its mouth wide, revealing its curved teeth. It coiled up defensively. The snake was massive, roughly 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately contacted the local police. While they waited, the men kept a close watch on the snake. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. I've seen firsthand how the smallest oversight can lead to tragedy in the wild. A zipper left slightly open, a rustling in the grass dismissed as nothing. It's a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we are when we step into nature's domain. I remember one case, the one that really stuck with me, involved a woman named Clare, who just wanted to photograph tigers. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, Rajasthan, India. The air was cool after a hot day, and the campsite was dark. Two travelers were asleep in their tent, unaware that a snake had silently slipped inside. One of those travelers was Clare Johnson, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, Australia. She had quit her job and saved for 2 years to travel around Asia. Her friends knew her as adventurous but careful. She researched the places she visited, carried medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. Ranthambore was a place she had always wanted to see, dreaming of photographing wild tigers. She had even seen a female tiger on a safari tour that day. She was staying at a basic eco-camp outside the park, sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train. The tents were clean and built on raised platforms. Claire was meticulous about keeping their tent organized, always shaking out her shoes and zipping the tent up properly. That evening, she had zipped the canvas door all the way closed, leaving only a small opening for fresh air. The camp was next to dry grassland with acacia trees and tall grass. At night, insects buzzed, and sometimes they heard peacocks. The ground was hard dirt covered with leaves and rocks. This environment was perfect for reptiles like the spectacled cobra, recognizable by the circular pattern on its hood. These snakes usually avoid people, but sometimes venture into human areas for food or warmth. Adult cobras can grow up to 6 feet long and have a potent venom that affects the nervous system, capable of killing a person within hours without treatment. Local guides always warned campers to check their bedding, because snakes sometimes crawl inside unnoticed. Sometime after 4 a.m., Lara woke up to a rustling sound near the bottom of the tent. Half asleep, she turned on her phone's flashlight and froze in fear. A spectacled cobra was coiled just inches from Claire's sleeping bag, its head raised slightly. Before Lara could react, Claire moved in her sleep, and her bare ankle touched the snake. The cobra bit her twice, sinking its fangs into her skin. It happened so fast that Lara barely saw it until Claire gasped. Lara screamed, waking everyone in the camp. Claire sat up, grabbing her ankle, where 2 small holes marked the snake's bite. Camp workers ran to the tent with flashlights and saw the snake crawl out. Claire's breathing became rapid and shallow, and her eyes looked glassy. When she tried to stand, her legs gave way. Her voice was quiet as she said her legs felt like jelly before falling back onto her mat. The camp had no anti-venom. The staff put Claire in a jeep to drive her to the hospital, with Lara pressing a scarf above the bite marks to slow the poison. The drive took over 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway there, Claire stopped responding. Her skin became pale, cold, and damp. When they reached the rural clinic, the medical staff said there was nothing they could do. Clare's body was taken to Jaipur. I've seen firsthand how quickly a seemingly perfect scene can turn tragic. The story of Jorge Cruz, a 42-year-old lime orchard worker in Veracruz, Mexico, is one that stayed with me. He knew the land, the trees, the rhythm of the seasons. Yet, on September 9th, 2015, a single moment shattered his life and became a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk even in familiar landscapes. Later that day, Lara's parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. They requested that her body be cremated following local customs. The camp management, deciding not to close, hired a local snake expert. He started giving weekly talks to new guests, teaching them how to properly check their tents and where to keep lights on at night to avoid snake encounters. Lara eventually returned to Germany and later wrote a detailed account of her experience on a travel website. Her story served as a warning to other backpackers, urging them to always inspect their tents, bedding and shoes when in snake-prone areas. For years, that post quietly circulated, a somber reminder to travelers who romanticized sleeping close to nature without fully grasping the risks. It underscored the importance of taking safety precautions seriously in wilderness areas, showing how even experienced travelers like Clare can face unexpected dangers when humans and wildlife share the same space. The tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. That same day, September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico, Jorge Cruz was going about his usual routine. He'd worked that orchard his whole life, rising before sunrise to tend to the water systems, prune the trees, and teach his son how to discern healthy fruit from diseased. He was known in the village as a reliable man, the kind who would fix a neighbour's broken cart, or lend tools without expecting anything in return. He even had a habit of working without shoes, claiming it helped him feel the ground better and move more quickly when climbing the lower branches. It was a very hot afternoon, the air heavy and still. The sun beat down on the leaves with such intensity that nothing seemed to stir. The orchard, a family legacy spanning generations, was about to witness an interruption that would forever alter its tranquil rhythm. Jorge was working alongside two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, near a pile of cut tree branches left after a recent clearing. The three men joked about the heat as they moved among the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge, wearing his wide hat pushed back on his head and a faded old shirt, reached for a low branch, shifting his weight to bring the fruit closer. The ground was hard-packed dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade to mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows. The air was so quiet that small sounds, a falling fruit, clothes brushing against bark, were easily discernible. The men were focused on their work and conversation, seemingly unaware of the potential dangers around them. A type of poisonous snake called the Tersopilobropsespa, locally known as the narca, is common in Central America. These snakes, thick-bodied and typically 3 to 5 feet long, possess a potent venom that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding, and disrupts blood clotting and blood pres. They blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining motionless until someone is nearly upon them. Their bite typically causes excruciating pain and rapid swelling. That morning, neighbours had spoken of increased snake sightings due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had urged him to wear boots while clearing brush, but the pile of cut branches where they were working was a temporary heap of trimmings, exactly the kind of place where snakes like to hide. Raúl later recalled warning Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. Then, as Jorge shifted his position, the attack happened with terrifying speed. The snake burst from the leaves and bit him just above the ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge cry out sharply and saw him recoil, clutching at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain was immediate and intense. Jorge doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, the skin becoming bruised and discolored. He began to vomit, sweating profusely, his face paling. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they fashioned a splint from a broom handle to immobilize Jorge's leg. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, then pushed the cart toward the dirt road, leading back to the village. The journey to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, his speech fragmented, drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg, noting his weak pulse and low blood press. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no anti-venom, the specialized medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff radioed the regional health center for assistance, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition deteriorated rapidly. He became increasingly disoriented, his breathing shallow. Despite the medical staff's efforts to stop the bleeding and assist his breathing, they were powerless to save him. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic. Raúl said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick plants. I've seen the aftermath of these encounters, the visible reminders of absences. A hat worn by a grieving wife, a simple pole marking where someone was bitten. It's a sobering thing, how quickly life can change. I remember reading about one such incident that took place on May 2nd, 2018, near the Cross River. The air was heavy and still that day. A young woman named Mina Belogan, only 19, had just returned from university a week earlier. She loved spending her afternoons at the river, often swimming there with her cousins. The older villagers warned them about snakes, especially during the dry season. But Mina didn't believe anything dangerous could happen in the shallow water. That day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her. She was full of plans, dreaming of starting a community project to teach younger children how to swim safely. The river, to her, was a place of life, not danger. They left their sandals on the rocks and waded into the cool water. The afternoon air was humid, dragonflies skimming the surface of the river. Even though it was bright, long shadows stretched from the thick plants on the opposite bank, darkening the deeper parts of the water. What Mina didn't know was that an older fisherman had warned her uncle about a very large python he'd seen sunning itself on a log nearby. Children had been told to stay out of the water until the rains came and raised the water levels. But Mina insisted that the shallow bend where they swam was safe. She'd been in the water for almost an hour when one of her cousins spotted something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they dismissed it as a tree branch, but then it curved and moved silently across the surface. The patterned body of an enormous python became visible. The snake attacked with incredible speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side, and its body coiled around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake constricted, forcing the air from Mina's lungs. The water churned as she fought against the snake, then stilled as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children fled back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their knives and reach the river. By the time they arrived, the snake had pulled Mina deeper. They went into the water and slashed at the python until it finally released her. They pulled her onto the muddy bank, but she had been underwater for too long. Her skin was cold and pale, her lips a deep blue. They tried desperately to revive her, pressing on her chest, blowing air into her mouth. Water mixed with mud poured from her mouth and nose. Someone recorded the scene, the sounds of shouting and rushing water mingling with the thud of knives against the snake's body. Their efforts were in vain. Mina's body was laid on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. In the weeks that followed, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen avoided it, calling it cursed. The village learned a harsh lesson. Even familiar places can hide unexpected dangers, especially when animals seek water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on a new urgency, as the community worked to prevent such tragedies from happening again. There are moments in history when a single lapse in judgment can cascade into tragedy. I think about that often. I think about the story of Sammy, a seasoned snake handler whose dedication ultimately led to his demise. His story is a stark reminder of how easily expertise can be overshadowed by circumstance, and how quickly a life can be altered by a single misstep. Sammy was a steady presence at the festival, someone who had years of practical experience. He was the one who taught the new volunteers, always preferring to show them hands-on rather than just talking about it. He firmly believed that experience was the key to reducing danger. The local people trusted Sammy implicitly because he rarely rushed his work. He always took the time to correct any sloppy technique without making a big deal out of it. This particular year, the festival had drawn a larger crowd than usual, and the organizers, perhaps unwisely, had tightened the schedule. Sammy had been moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions from visitors, spending a lot of time under the sun. He'd even skipped a full breakfast to keep the demonstrations running smoothly, and by midday he was feeling quite fatigued. He chalked it up to the heat and being tired. His co-workers noticed and told him to rest and drink water, and he nodded, but he just kept on working. When someone asked him to do one more live demonstration that afternoon, he agreed, seeing it as his responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits for displaying snakes. These pits were surrounded by temporary barriers, with a raised platform for the announcer and folding chairs for the audience. The air was thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water containers were placed near the pits, but the layout was cramped, leaving the volunteers exposed to the sun. People leaned against the fence, phones held high, recording every movement. The setup was designed for maximum visibility, but this unfortunately reduced the space for handlers to move around and limited opportunities for both people and animals to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, potent pit vipers typically 4 to 5 feet long, were the stars of the show. Their venom, as you know, causes tissue damage and bleeding, and can trigger shock throughout the body if a person receives a large enough dose. Large adult snakes can strike with surprising reach, and when stressed, a snake may twist unexpectedly, changing how a handler is gripping it and potentially exposing unprotected skin. Even the most skilled handlers can be bitten when a snake is already upset, or when heat and repeated handling increase its stress level. Earlier that day, organizers had warned volunteers about taking turns and limiting heavy snake handling during the hottest part of the day. A minor incident during a morning demonstration had prompted them to formally remind everyone to take breaks and drink water. Medical personnel were on standby with IV fluids and anti-venom readily available on site. Sammy heard the instructions and, of course, agreed with them. But the lure of the crowd and the demands of the busy schedule drew him back to work. He took a heavy western diamondback snake from a colleague and stepped into the pit, wearing a leather glove and carrying a snake hook. With a practiced motion, he lifted the snake. For a moment, the crowd seemed to relax, as Sammy's steady presence had a calming effect on the onlookers. Then, without warning, the snake's body shifted under stress, twisting sharply. It lunged forward, and its fangs pierced the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled that he was, but his face flushed red, and sweat beaded on his forehead. For several minutes he continued talking to the crowd, but his breathing grew shallow, and he eventually asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, and discoloration appeared, spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling had moved past his elbow toward his shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as the tissue damage progressed. Volunteers quickly moved him to the first aid tent when it became clear he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied press to slow the spread of the venom, started IV fluids, and administered the first vials of antivenom. His breathing became increasingly shallow, his skin cold and blotched with bruising. Despite the rapid treatment, his blood pressure plummeted and his pulse faded. Witnesses later recalled the frantic attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift, but it never arrived in time. In the aftermath, Sammy's friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions. They invited regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, learning the crucial lesson of prioritizing taking turns and staying hydrated over putting on a good show. The festival board meticulously documented the incident and created a checklist for demonstrations, including maximum handling time, required breaks, and a rapid evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It reminds me of another story, one that unfolded far away in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon on March 15, 2016. There, hidden among towering mahogany trees near the Sanga River, sat a converted logging camp, isolated on 50 acres of abandoned concession land. This property had once been a legitimate primate research station, operating with proper government permits, but those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been illegally operating this facility for 3 years after her research permits expired. She refused to surrender one particular animal, Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and stubbornly refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. The Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. I'll never forget the day I read the report about Erica. The details haunted me for weeks. It started with warning signs, of course, signs that were ignored. Caesar, a western lowland gorilla, was kept in improper conditions. These are incredibly powerful primates, you see. Adult males possess the strength of 10 humans. Their hands can crush, their teeth can tear. Despite their generally peaceful nature in the wild, captive gorillas under stress become unpredictably violent. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress, something that should have been obvious. These magnificent creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclosure, ignoring her commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod and unlocked the heavy gate to his pen. A fatal decision. As she stepped inside, wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclosure. His body slammed into Erica's chest with incredible force, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut into her back as Caesar's hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, which still clutched the makeshift prod. His bite force crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered, creating a pool of blood. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg and twisted, snapping her femur bone. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her rib cage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his palms and squeezed. Her skull cracked like an eggshell, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Center. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River. The remote wilderness area had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children to this secluded spot. What made this trip different was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck, containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer. He was overconfident, convinced that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbors it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence. But bureaucratic Della, there's something about the wildness that can never be truly tamed. Even when raised in captivity, a cougar's primal instincts remain, sometimes growing stronger when faced with the unfamiliar. I remember reading about a man named Landon and his tragic encounter with a cougar named Scout. Landon made the fatal mistake of thinking he could domesticate Scout, treating the predator like an oversized house cat. He released Scout from the transport crate, wanting to let the 3-year-old cougar stretch and explore. As Landon's family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged, immediately surveying the unfamiliar territory. The cougar's predatory instincts took over as Landon walked toward the river. Scout crouched low, muscles coiling, tail twitching, calculating with deadly precision. The cougar launched, striking Landon in the back. Claws sank deep, jaws clamped down, severing the spinal cord. Landon was paralyzed, face submerged, drowning within 90 seconds. Scout dragged the lifeless body away. The family, witnessing this horror, rushed to the safety of their locked truck. Authorities investigated the illegal possession of the cougar, sparking debates about exotic animal ownership. I've also read about Marcus Ellison, a 41-year-old oil rig worker in South Texas. He had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer. He believed their bond would protect him. His girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a veterinary technician, had been pressuring him to surrender Luna to a sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. Luna had been refusing food, marking territory, pacing obsessively, pupils constantly dilated. Neighbors reported strange vocalizations. Jaguars possess the strongest bite force of any feline, capable of crushing turtle shells. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he entered Luna's enclosure without backup. He believed their bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate and stepped inside. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, waiting. As Marcus knelt and extended his hand, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. I'll never forget reading about Luna, the jaguar. Her jaws locked with surgical precision around Marcus's throat. A bite force of 1,500 pounds per square inch, crushing his windpipe, severing arteries. It was a grim testament to the raw power of wild instincts. The following morning, Lisa discovered the horrific scene. Luna calmly grooming blood from her paws, Marcus's body lying partially consumed in the center of the pen. The incident, as these things often do, sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership. Now I want to take you to June 14th, 2018. A seemingly peaceful suburban neighborhood in Homestead, Florida. Manicured lawns, swaying palm trees. But behind one of the modest rental houses was an elaborate pond system, 40 by 60 feet, artificially maintained, and home to one of nature's most formidable predators. This was where Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, was conducting thesis research on reptilian behavior. She shared the property with her friends Kevin, a photographer documenting her work, and Amanda, a social media influencer drawn to the house's unique backyard feature. 2 years prior, Brianna had rescued Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator, from a failing roadside attraction. The alligator had been malnourished and living in deplorable conditions, and Brianna, driven by her knowledge, believed she could provide a better life while studying him. What Amanda's landlord didn't know was that a 350-pound apex predator was residing in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating for weeks. Brutus was growing increasingly aggressive during feeding, lunging at the pond's edge. Yet, Brianna continued to hand-feed him, trusting her scientific understanding. Neighbors had started complaining about strange splashing sounds at night. Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, exhibiting classic hunting behavior. You see, American alligators are among the most efficient predators, virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet, weights exceeding 800 pounds, and jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. Enough to crush a bowling ball. Their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. They are ambush hunters, capable of explosive bursts of speed. And it was as the Florida sun began to set that Brianna made her fatal mistake. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond. And despite Kevin's suggestion to use a pool net, she insisted on retrieving it herself. Dusk is the most active hunting period for alligators. And as Brianna waded into the pond, the water reaching her thighs, Brutus began his approach. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake. Brianna bent down, focused on retrieving her equipment, unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline, preparing for his assault. It came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward, his massive jaws opening wide, revealing rows of conical teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, his jaw crushing her femur instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again with ruthless efficiency, his jaws clamping down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her rib cage. There are moments when nature's indifference chills me to the bone, like the story of Brutus, the alligator. He dragged Brianna toward the deeper section of the pond, holding her underwater with relentless determination. The thrashing continued for nearly 2 minutes as Brutus performed his instinctive drowning technique. Brianna's body went limp as her lungs filled. It was October 3rd, 2016, in the Adirondack Mountains, that I find myself thinking about now. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among the dense forest. This isolated retreat had become home to Sean Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator whose career had ended in disgrace. The bitter and increasingly paranoid man had retreated to this inherited family property after losing his rehabilitation license following a previous bear incident. He shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior had driven him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, with adult males capable of reaching speeds of 30 meditatus poetin and possessing the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of pres per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls. Their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15x20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the press, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. I've always been drawn to stories where humans and animals intersect, sometimes tragically. Consider Michael Torres, a mechanic in Texas. He preferred engines to people, it was said. He lived alone, fixing up old cars and tending to his collection of animals. It started small, with ball pythons and iguanas. Then came a serval, and finally Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger. He truly believed the tiger recognized him, that it would never hurt him. He said it was about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. But trust can be a fragile thing, especially with an apex predator. That day in March 2015 was overcast and sticky, the air thick with humidity. A friend, Luis Alvarez, had stopped by to borrow a tool. He watched as Michael carried things toward Raja's enclosure. The tiger was pacing restlessly, tail flicking, eyes following every movement. There was construction nearby, and Michael said the tiger didn't like the noise. He thought it would settle once he started cleaning. Luis was standing about 20 yards away as Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings into a bin. For convenience, he'd left the outer gate partially open. It wasn't the first time he'd done it. Luis said that as Michael worked, Raja continued pacing, muscles tensing with each pass along the fence. Michael glanced up once, muttered something, and bent again to lift a shovel. Then Luis saw the tiger freeze. Its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching rapidly. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact was a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, and he went down. Raja followed, jaws clamping around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted, threw a wrench, but it was useless. Michael swung the shovel, striking Raja's snout, but the tiger's jaws only tightened. Luis grabbed gravel, screaming for the tiger to stop, but Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. When deputies arrived, they held position until animal control arrived with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, an officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter. Michael's body showed extensive trauma. Investigators noted that he had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. It was a quiet end for Michael. His sister handled the arrangements, declining interviews. Fewer than 20 people attended the funeral. Neighbors left flowers at the fence. The straw inside still stained dark where the attack happened. And then there was Ahmad Firdaus in Surabaya, Indonesia. There's a story that's been circulating quietly within a warehouse community, a warning told in fragments. It's about a man who treated a Komodo dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to the dragon he was always prey. Ahmad, neighbours remembered him as generous, the man who sponsored youth football games and handed out bottled water to delivery drivers. But he also kept a Komodo dragon. It was small when he got it, designed for a creature half its current size. He fed it chicken parts and goat meat, often by hand, proud of its trust in him. The few employees who had seen it warned him to be careful. One worker, Yudi Santoso, even told him the animal was no longer tame. But Ahmad only smiled and said it knew him. Then came that Thursday morning. It was still and overcast, the smell of diesel drifting from the nearby road. Ahmad had skipped feeding the previous evening, distracted by a shipment problem. By sunrise, he noticed the dragon's water basin overturned and filthy. Wanting to clean it before the day's work began, the gate creaked as he entered the enclosure. The animal was in the far corner, body motionless. Komodo dragons, you see, can grow up to 10 ft and deliver a bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom contains anticoagulants and toxins that cause rapid blood loss and lowered blood pressure, weakening prey through shock. They are ambush predators, capable of bursts of speed despite their heavy frame. In captivity, they can become defensive or aggressive if handled frequently or underfed. Yudi, working in the front section of the warehouse, heard the clang of metal and a low thud. Then came a sharp cry. He dropped his clipboard and ran toward the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto his right calf, its teeth sunk deep through fabric and skin. Blood darkened the concrete beneath him. Ahmad kicked out with his free leg, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, its head jerking back before it lunged again, jaws clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head side to side, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole, leaning by the fence, and swung hard, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping across the floor. When it faced him again, its throat bulged with each breath, saliva stringing from its jaws. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a thick smear of blood behind. The dragon lunged once more, this time catching his side just below the ribs, its jaws locked, teeth sinking deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream broke into a gasping rasp. Yudi struck again and again, shouting, until the creature finally backed off a few feet. Ahmad slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed weakly against the wound. The concrete beneath him gleamed dark red, the smell of iron thick in the humid air. Yudi ran to the pen gate, dragging a burlap sack from a supply shelf. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on the movement. The animal lunged toward the sack, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut, locking it with trembling hands. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived from the nearest clinic, Ahmad was already gone. Later reports confirmed he had suffered multiple deep lacerations to the leg, arm, and abdomen with significant internal bleeding. Death was attributed to massive exsanguination and traumatic shock from the venom's anticoagulant effects. Veterinarians who examined the animal later said it had shown signs of food aggression, behavior triggered when prey, or a familiar handler moves suddenly during feeding. Police secured the warehouse and contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, measuring just under 7 ft and weighing nearly 140 lb, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation centre in Banyangi. Officials identified it as originating from Rinca Island, confirming it had been obtained through illegal trade networks. The story reached local newspapers for only a day before being buried beneath business and traffic reports. Then there was another incident. It was May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana. The morning was clear and still, the kind of quiet that hung heavy before the heat built up. A line of spruce trees framed the small animal sanctuary Mark Jennings had built from the ground up. Inside, one enclosure stood larger than the rest, its occupant pacing slow, deliberate circles. By noon, that silence would be shattered. Mark Jennings was 49, a former wildlife handler for film productions. He had left the industry in his 30s to start an educational sanctuary outside Bozeman. He ran school tours, wildlife demonstrations, and rescue programs for injured raptors and foxes. His pride was a 1,000 lb brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub after being orphaned during a legal hunt in Alaska. To Mark, Bruno represented proof that wild animals could bond with humans through trust rather than fear. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years. He was intelligent, food-driven, and typically calm around people he knew. The enclosure was spacious with reinforced fencing, a pond, and a shaded feeding platform. Mark managed most care himself, but occasionally brought in help. Aaron Cole was one of those helpers. A licensed trainer who had worked with Bruno multiple times without issue. She followed protocols carefully, but admitted she always kept her distance during feeding. Mark trusted her completely, enough to call her one of the few people Bruno recognized. Brown bears of Kodiak lineage are among the largest terrestrial carnivores, capable of standing over 9 ft tall and delivering a bite force exceeding $1,200 LEB per square in. While generally solitary and predictable in the wild, captivity can alter their tolerance thresholds. Even long-term handlers face risk if food, scent, or routine changes. During feeding, aggression can surface suddenly, triggered by... I've spent years reading accounts of human-animal conflict, but some details never fade. They echo in my mind, the small, sharp sounds of life turning to tragedy. The creak of metal gates, a deep huffing between swipes of a paw. That day at the sanctuary, it was early summer, the air thick with the smell of hay and meat. The animals were restless. Aaron arrived to prepare Bruno's meal, 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark, her colleague, had driven to Helena the previous evening to see his sister. He reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, Mark texted Aaron around 10 am, but received no reply. He assumed she was busy and started driving back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to Bruno's enclosure was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming. He ran toward the sound and saw Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently, then adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting, "Stop!" Abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbour who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. On August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa, the air was heavy from the previous night's storm. The ground was damp, and the acacia trees were still dripping. At Johan Boa's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. It was mid-morning, and tourists had yet to arrive. Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, but one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johann insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johann that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johann brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johann took a broom and bucket toward the enclos, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. There are moments I can't shake from my mind, images that replay with a chilling clarity. The story of Jan, for instance. I still remember the exact detail. The way Simba's tail flicked sharply just before the attack. It's a reminder that even in captivity, the wild remains. The other worker, he was filming as Jan approached the gate. It was a casual recording, almost mundane. Simba had been pacing inside, but then he stopped. His ears shifted forward, his body low to the ground. Jan entered, closing the inner gate behind him, but leaving the outer one ajar. He began sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly as he worked. The worker kept filming, fascinated by Jan's calmness. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then Simba began circling, his tail flicking sharply, a signal almost imperceptible. The witnesses interviewed later all agreed. Simba's behavior changed fast. He lowered his head, crouching, and then he lunged. The impact knocked Jan forward onto the dirt, the broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled and pushed against the lion's muzzle with his free arm, but Simba shifted his grip, his teeth sinking into the back of Jan's neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan several feet toward the shade structure, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jan tried rolling onto his back, kicking at the animal's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee ran toward the gate with a bucket, throwing water over the fence. But it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut, slamming the gate alarm that signaled an animal emergency. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers from a nearby property arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Jan's body. When the lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched, growled, and backed several steps before collapsing beside Jan. Once Simba was confirmed sedated, the team pulled Yan's body free using a canvas stretcher, his clothing torn and soaked through with blood. The autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite, mements, and tissue analysis confirmed a single sustained attack consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed that same week. Simba was euthanized humanely after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab in Pretoria for examination. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. His wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclose was sealed for good. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind the modest brick house, 2 large cages stood under a tin awning, built strong but weathered, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, 2 chimpanzees making sharp and uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for 2 young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 pounds, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 pounds, their jaws capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1,200 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. Linda, it's a disbelief that has always stayed with me. How a bond built over years can turn fatal in seconds. I saw it in the faces of Linda's former co-workers at her funeral, held quietly in a mobile chapel. They remembered her as gentle and curious, but behind the condolences there was a shared shock. The enclosure where it happened was later dismantled. All that remained was a bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark where the hose couldn't wash everything away. It was April 17th, 2015, just outside Chicago, Illinois. The afternoon was bright and warm. Yellow school buses pulled into the parking lot of a small private animal park, a roadside zoo with fading paint and rust showing through its old fences. Families with strollers mixed with school groups carrying packed lunches. Teachers with clipboards tried to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow moat lined with algae. A hand-painted sign read, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside the enclosure, 2 adult males and 1 younger female lived together among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture stains, and the enclosure looked outdated compared to the modern habitats seen in larger, accredited zoos. Matthew Collins was 12 years old, a 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse, and his father operated a forklift at a local warehouse. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. His teachers described him as bright but impulsive, a boy who liked to climb trees, rooftops, or anything taller than himself. At the park, he carried a second-hand digital camera he'd saved for by helping neighbors mow lawns. His plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera, but couldn't get a clear view past the others. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance, as a few classmates noticed and motioned for him to stop. He ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in the frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled for balance. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below. He landed hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. A few kids started crying. For a moment, the enclosure was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling. Deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The two chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite. It was a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating, as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated. I remember reading about a chimpanzee attack years ago, and it's a story that has always stayed with me. It happened on a quiet afternoon in Stamford, Connecticut. A woman named Belinda Holmes, who lived on Rockledge Drive, was about to face something unimaginable inside her ordinary-looking home. What lived inside made it different from every other house on the block. Belinda was 57 years old and well known for keeping an unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She had gotten Charlie as an infant, ignoring state laws that banned private ownership. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, and driving him around in her car. Her friends said she was devoted to him and believed she could control him the way others controlled pets. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared when he looked out the windows, and neighbors watched Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family and defended him whenever anyone expressed concern. But there were warning signs. Charlie had grown much larger over the years. By age 12, he weighed over 120 lbs. Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset, but she insisted he was gentle and misunderstood. The house showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often smelled of animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room to the small backyard. On that June day, the weather was warm and the windows were open. Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. Years of living in a human household had not removed Charlie's natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly with violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been warnings before. Months earlier, a neighbor called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars and pounded on a vehicle before Belinda brought him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie became irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm. The attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbours heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pulled quickly across the carpet as he continued the assault with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbours running to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. Officers fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands, requiring amputation and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbours gathered outside. This attack brings to mind another incident, one that occurred at an animal park. A man named Matthew was the victim of a chimpanzee attack there. The animal retreated toward the back wall, hooting loudly. Staff rushed in with stretchers the moment the animals were secured in their holding cages. Matthew lay face up, motionless, except for shallow breaths. His right arm was badly lacerated with deep puncture wounds near the elbow and wrist. There were facial injuries consistent with blunt force strikes and a bite near his cheekbone. Paramedics worked to stabilize him, but he went into cardiac arrest before they reached the hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival, his injuries too severe from blood loss and trauma. Authorities launched an investigation within hours. Inspectors found the barrier around the enclosure didn't meet state standards for height or secondary containment. The park, already cited twice in previous years for safety violations, lacked a formal emergency response team. Officials determined that a combination of poor infrastructure and human error had allowed the accident to turn fatal. In the following week, grief counsellors visited Matthew's school. Several students who had witnessed the fall reported nightmares and panic at loud noises. The animal park temporarily closed the chimp exhibit, promising stronger barriers and clearer supervision protocols. I'll never forget reading about the screams. People who witnessed the attack said those sounds would stay with them forever. It was a chimpanzee. Belinda, the victim in that earlier attack, survived, but her life was irrevocably changed. Multiple surgeries couldn't undo the disfigurement, and she required constant care. The case ignited a national conversation about the inherent risks of keeping exotic animals as pets. In response, Connecticut lawmakers enacted stricter regulations, including a complete ban on private chimpanzee ownership. The house where it happened was eventually sold, the new owners forever aware of its tragic history. Then there was Daniel Ortiz. It was May 28, 2017, a Memorial Day barbecue on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, nestled along a bend of the Colorado River. A few families had gathered at a privately rented picnic site, a quiet patch of grass shaded by live oaks and bordering the open water. Cars lined the dirt access road, and children played near the grills as adults unpacked food and folding chairs. The afternoon heat shimmered off the water near a cluster of tables by the riverbank. But one guest had brought an animal more commonly seen behind glass. Daniel, a 36-year-old high school track coach, lived just a few miles away. He frequented the trail most weekends and often met friends for cookouts when the weather was clear. Known for his reliability, Daniel was the kind of person who always brought extra water and sunscreen. That day, he had finished a 5-mile run and decided to stop by the Riverside barbecue after a friend mentioned it. Drawn by the small crowd near the tables, he walked over, his curiosity piqued. Daniel felt comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, helping calm, anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept a respectful distance, positioning himself behind a low trash can, maintaining space. The chimp wore a harness, and its owner engaged with onlookers, offering small pieces of fruit. Daniel wanted just one clear photo to show his students, proof of the strange thing he'd seen on a normal Sunday. He moved a few feet forward, holding his phone out, angling for a clean shot past the group of people. The scene seemed ordinary enough. The chimp paced in a small circle on its leash, constantly shifting, sniffing the air, and reaching towards anything held too close. A faint, musky scent drifted downwind, mingling with the charcoal smoke from the nearby grills. But adult male chimpanzees are not meant for public gatherings. In their social groups, dominance is often enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling can't completely erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and the competition for food can trigger those instincts in an instant. A city ordinance prohibited exotic animals within Austin limits, but this site was just beyond the city's jurisdiction. Few at the event realized the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple near the front recoiled when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a bright red cup. The owner shortened the leash but continued to feed it bits of fruit. A runner passing by on the dirt road warned that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, and waited for the chimp to settle, hoping to get one steady shot. The tension was palpable. Children clustered too close and were quickly pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate and grunted, its eyes fixed on the moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had become slack around his wrist. Daniel stepped a little closer, maybe 2 feet forward, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a split second, everything was still except the wind. Then, the lunge. It covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. The phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite struck his forearm just below the elbow, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free. But the chimp's grip remained firm. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams erupted from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, its weight pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll and get to his feet, but the chimp climbed onto his torso and hammered his shoulder with its fists. The leash tangled around the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the chaos, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed, one after another. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung an arm without looking and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were distinct and awful. The wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel each time teeth met bone. A woman dragged 2 children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, his hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg, creating a temporary barrier. The chimp released its grip, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing seemed to work. Emergency calls were made within seconds, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that had filled the air. I've always been drawn to the moments when the wild and the domestic collide, often with devastating consequences. I remember reading once about a seemingly ordinary day in Los Angeles that turned into a nightmare, and it stayed with me for days. It was September the 14th, 2018, a morning much like any other. But within hours, a trained chimpanzee would unleash a brutal attack on his handler during a daytime talk show segment. The production took place at a small studio, the kind tucked away between warehouses. Kevin Harris, an experienced animal trainer, had brought Mike, a 13-year-old chimp he'd worked with since infancy. Kevin had built his career on patiently teaching wild animals to tolerate human environments. But even with years of training, the set proved to be too much. Mike, despite his familiarity with Kevin and production life, was still a powerful, unpredictable animal. Adult chimps, as handlers know, can become volatile as their dominance instincts sharpen. The set was simple: a sofa, a coffee table, a backdrop. Mike, wearing only a light collar and leash, sat beside Kevin, already showing signs of stress. An animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment, noting Mike's pacing, teeth baring, and sharp tugs on the lead. But the director, pressed for time, insisted they proceed. Kevin re-azzed everyone, offering Mike banana to calm him. For a few seconds after recording began, everything seemed fine. Then, a boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. A low pant hoot echoed in the studio. Kevin, sensing the shift, reached out to calm him, but that brief touch broke the fragile balance. The chimp lunged. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room erupted in chaos. The chimp bit Kevin's arm, tearing through muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed. The attack continued, relentless. Crew members screamed, one swinging a tripod in a desperate attempt to stop him. Security arrived, using fire extinguishers to finally subdue Mike. Kevin survived, but his injuries were horrific. Dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The footage was never aired. The aftermath revealed lapses in protocol and a disregard for the safety consultant's warning. It was a lesson learned at an unbearable cost. The following year, on October 9th, 2019, a different kind of encounter unfolded along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda. There are places where the shrinking world of chimpanzees presses right up against our own. I remember reading about a photographer named Martin, who went looking for chimpanzees near a mountain road, hoping to capture a unique image. He'd photographed gorillas and monkeys before, but this time his drive for the perfect shot led him into terrible danger. He parked near a bend in the road, camera in hand, and began walking along the shoulder. A local motorbike rider shouted a warning, gesturing towards the trees. But Martin waved back, more concerned about speeding trucks than the animals. The highway sliced through green ridges, walls of vegetation crowding the asphalt. Chimpanzees, I've learned, sometimes appear along these margins, easily climbing embankments or descending into roadside ditches. In their dwindling habitat, the edge of the asphalt has become just another boundary to patrol. I've read that rangers at the Kabalay Visitor Centre often advise tourists to stay inside their vehicles when driving through the forest. Truck drivers have reported seeing chimps near bends where fruit trees grow close to the road. Locals avoid walking alone there, especially in the morning when the animals are most active. Martin had been warned, but he dismissed it, confident from his experience working safely around gorillas in stricter conditions. Just a few minutes into his walk, he spotted movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Two smaller chimps lingered behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear angle. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept snapping photos, zooming in for a close shot, stepping forward into the lane, unaware that the chimp had begun to climb down toward him. The descent took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the distance on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with incredible speed. The impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm, ripping skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting in horror. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were terrible. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt far longer to the witnesses before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp finally released Martin and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and he was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.